This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today, recorded on November 2nd for December 31st, 2015.
Tech News Today is the show where we talk about the tech news of the journalists who report it. Welcome to the show. I'm Mike Elgan.
I am Megan Morrone. For our special holiday shows, we'll be looking at some of the biggest and most controversial stories of the year.
And today we're talking about the new realities, as in virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and how these new media will impact culture and society in reality. Megan, you've got a whole bunch of kids.
I do, yeah. They're the future of virtual reality. They're going to be the ones using this, and I think they would.
Yeah.
I've tried a little. They've tried Google Cardboard. They've tried something called Noon that's from Korea. They put it on. They never want to take it off. They want to live completely in virtual reality for the rest of their lives.
Including your daughter?
My boys.
Okay.
My daughter, she likes it too. Yeah. But yeah, it's this kind of immersive world that it's actually a little bit scary. I hate to sound like an old person.
Yeah, no,
but
it should be scary.
But yeah, kids these days, they love the virtual reality. But yeah, I think it is the future. But part of me also thinks, like, we've been saying this for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, like back when we were kids, there was the idea of virtual reality, and that was all hype that hasn't really.
When you were a kid, we didn't have the concept when I was a kid. But we, one of the things that I think is interesting about virtual reality is that people think it's primarily a gaming platform. And I think it's going to be primarily a social platform. I've sort of been converted by Mark Zuckerberg on this point, who, when he bought Oculus VR, he said, oh, it's the future of social. And everybody kind of went, huh? How is that possible? But I think that's really what's going to happen. If you look at even gaming has all gone social. I mean, even first-person shooters have become massively multiplayer online games where people are interacting with each other. It's kind of you socialize with somebody before you shoot them, et cetera. And so I think that social is going to be really huge. But let's not talk too much about it before we get our real expert in here. Today, we're going to be talking with Addie Robertson, who writes for The Verge. She specializes in virtual reality and some other things as well. Addie Robertson, welcome to Tech News Today.
Hi.
So glad you're here to talk about this, and I always love your articles on virtual reality. You seem to have a really great handle and perspective on it, and you tend to be very sort of kind of contrarian sometimes, which is very healthy and good. A lot of the VR content is just so, cheerleading and rah-rah, it's all good without any consequence, and you tend to have a more balanced perspective, and I appreciate that. But when I think about the coming world of virtual reality, I guess is the umbrella term we could use, I tend to think of it like this. There's the phone-based systems like Cardboard and Samsung Gear VR. Those are low cost, very accessible. Everybody's got a smartphone. You just plunk the smartphone in, and the smartphone becomes the sound system, the screen, the processor, the app engine, etc. And that's one category. Another category is real virtual reality like Oculus Rift and, say, presumably PlayStation VR. And then the third category is what you might call mixed reality platforms like Microsoft HoloLens and Magic Leap. Is that a reasonable way to categorize what's coming down the pike, or do you have a different way to categorize them?
That's totally reasonable. The one thing that seems like a really weird small distinction is that I think of Google Cardboard as having very different use cases to something like the Gear VR, basically just because one of them you have to wear in really small increments of time because you're literally holding it up to your face. And the other one you can do things like watch a movie in Netflix in when you're on the plane because you can just strap it on and sit back. So it's technically not a big difference, but in terms of the use case, it's a huge one.
Well, it is for now, but I mean, one of the things that I think is interesting about Cardboard is there's nothing to prevent anyone from putting a strap on it, first of all. And second of all, there's nothing to prevent anyone from using the camera and making it a sort of an augmented reality thing. I mean, there's, at least the version of Cardboard that I've had, there's a hole where the camera goes, and you could theoretically put virtual objects in real space, although you have trouble you couldn't map the room so that you couldn't be smart about where the table is and all that kind of stuff. So it really wouldn't work very well, but theoretically you could use the camera. Do you know of anybody who's doing that sort of thing, putting a strap or trying to use Cardboard for augmented reality?
I mean, in terms of augmented reality, Mattel actually has a viewer where you look through it and it uses the camera, and you can look at a little dial and see these figures pop up. The thing with the strap is that you actually literally can't make Google Cardboard with a strap. Not for any technical reasons, but because of social reasons. It is actually banned because they don't want people wearing it.
Banned by Google?
You cannot make a cardboard compliant headset at this point with a strap.
Wow.
Is that because they're afraid of people wearing it for too long?
That's more or less what I've heard.
That's fascinating.
That it's just not designed for that.
Well, the other big difference, the strap is, the time is a big difference. The cost is a big difference. Cardboard is cheap. These other devices are expensive. The equipment, the computers that you need to buy in order for a lot of them to work are expensive. How do you think those prices are going to come down? Do you think we're going to see them stay at the prices, or do you think we're going to see everyone kind of having like a cardboard version, a cheaper version of VR?
Well, the huge price drop that we saw between the prototype Gear VR and the $99 version is a pretty good sign that a lot of this is really up in the air, that we could see huge price drops. In terms of more sort of expensive VR systems, the really important thing isn't the headset, it's that you need a super high-powered computer to run it. So if you just go by the sort of general pace of computing, then it can definitely get a lot cheaper.
Now, Google's got something called the Expeditions Pioneer Program. They're trying to introduce Google Cardboard as an educational tool. They're doing this in the U.S., Australia, New Zealand, the U.K., and Brazil. I'm of two minds about this. On the one hand, I'm like, oh my God, that's fantastic. It's like people, these kids can go on the most amazing field trips. They go back in time. They can go to far-flung places and experience it as, close. Can't put a bunch of kids and send them to India to go to the Taj Mahal, for example. It's just fantastic. But on the other hand, I'm thinking, do we really, it's like a big marketing program for Google's products. And there's a persuasive argument to be made that kids shouldn't even be allowed to use smartphones in schools, let alone, virtual reality via smartphones. What's your view on this? Do you think that virtual reality in general is a healthy thing for children and should be part of our education system?
In terms of the promotional stuff, it feels a bit like tablets, which were a really big issue in schools a few years ago, that it is promotional, but it does have uses. I think overall that VR photography can be really powerful and very interesting. And it's not that you literally will think that you're in the Taj Mahal, but it does have this kind of visual pop that's really compelling. I personally find rendered cardboard environments, unless they're really amazing, to be a little underwhelming, because the whole point of those is that you want to be able to interact with them and move around and do things. So I think in that case, you'll really want a control system. And I think the idea of kids being able to control things or build things in VR is really interesting.
But then there's the flip side to that. Like, what are we missing, when we're missing actual field trips? Like maybe, I'm in Morocco and Google Cardboard, but, there's the argument people make that maybe going to your, local farm is better for kids in a physical way. Being there would be better. They're learning and they're, making different memories that are better just by actually being somewhere as opposed to being somewhere virtually. What do you think about that?
I think the question is whether you see it as a replacement or an add-on, because I don't think of it as a replacement for field trips. I think of it as a replacement for looking at the pictures in a history textbook. So it takes, 5 minutes to put it on. Instead of turning the page and staring at a picture of this place, you just pop on your headset and look around, and it's way more interesting.
Now, Addie, you've actually used the Oculus Touch controllers, jumping around here a little bit, but and so you've experienced, a bunch of different, I'm certain that you've experienced VR without controllers. So that can be a potentially frustrating experience because you want to have some way to use your hands in VR. But you've used these Oculus Touch controllers. What was that like? Was that a compelling experience?
It was in some ways a hugely freeing moment because it removed this huge barrier to things that you really wanted to be doing in VR, that a bunch of people, when they put it on, you kind of reach your hands out. And it's not because you literally think you're there, but that you're in the space and you just want to be able to interact with it. That said, I think there's a lot to still be done. I think Oculus doesn't really know what it wants to do, but the touch controllers were a fantastic start.
Let's talk about empathy. You tweeted recently about using VR for empathy in order to get you closer. That I think that was the New York Times argument when they have the new VR where they're sending the VR goggles to all their print subscribers, which is an interesting choice as opposed to their digital subscribers. And they said being able to see these stories, people in war-torn countries will increase empathy. What do you think about that?
In general, maybe this is just because I'm a writer and I like to think that words can inspire empathy, but I'm very suspicious of the idea that all we need is some kind of new technology that will let us feel more like other people to fix things. Because I don't think obviously you can feel greater empathy with people in war-torn countries, but a lot of the problems there aren't that people hate these people or that they don't feel bad for these children. It's that there are huge structural problems that we don't know how to deal with. And I think the idea of VR empathy gives us this sort of feel-good idea that if we all just understood each other better, that's all you have to do. And it's not just VR. This is a huge part of the internet. The idea that you can instantly connect with someone and we can all understand each other. It doesn't solve everything.
Now, I always think a lot about where this kind of technology is going. It never goes where people think it's going to go. For example, when everybody started using smartphones years and years ago, the way people thought of it was that companies were marrying a phone with what we used to call a PDA. So it was not only a phone, but also your calendar was on there. And you could even surf the internet. And nobody imagined that the main usage would be taking selfies and doing social networking and things like that. It always goes in a different direction, and a better direction, a more compelling, a more organic direction than the predictions suggest. And likewise, I think that's almost certain for virtual reality. I think people are thinking, oh, this is going to be the greatest replacement for the Xbox. Grand Theft Auto in virtual reality is going to be amazing, when you're going around clubbing people and it feels like you're really doing it. But I have the feeling that there are going to be just a huge explosion of completely different ways to use virtual reality. One of them is just a social space where you're represented by an avatar, kind of Second Life, but you really feel like you're in that space. That seems like a perfect inevitability and probably an incredibly popular use for virtual reality. Another one is live stream 360 3D video from actual events, like, not boring ones like the political debates, but, really, gnarly news events or incredible, fly on the wall sort of situations where you can be backstage at the Oscars or something like that. Maybe that wouldn't be that incredible. But what do you think is going to be the primary use of virtual reality in, say, 5 years, when it's kind of a banality, when it's affordable, lots of people have it? What are people going to be actually doing with it?
It's really, really hard to say because, for one thing, it depends hugely on how much you can interact with something. If the predominant sort of form of VR is something like the Gear VR, where you can select things and you can move around a bit, but it's not particularly tactile, then I think things like entertainment become very interesting and very useful. Like live stream events are great. You can put something on. You can see something like Chris Milk's Verse video, which is really visually compelling. If you get something that's more interactive, then I think that's when you start seeing things like social networks or games, or really that everything will be a little bit more game-like. That when we talk about VR for games, VR for social, VR for everything else, like Second Life is kind of both those things already. So I think that it's a huge open space that's probably just going to be a proving ground for what we actually find compelling in media.
So for all the devices that are available, all the devices that you've tried so far, which do you think is the most interesting and compelling?
HoloLens.
Why would you say that?
Because HoloLens is the only thing that I put on and think I want to wear this every day.
Have you played Minecraft with it? What did you do with it during the demo?
I played Minecraft, and people actually yell at me constantly for being too mean to the HoloLens because I think it has really big technical problems. But I tried Minecraft. Minecraft was okay. It wasn't something I was super into doing, but I tried an architecture simulator, made the little architectural models that sit on tables, and you could look at a screen and move your mouse and then you'd move your mouse right onto the model and you'd look around and you'd change things in it. And it just seemed so intuitive and so much like something that I could see people that I know doing. Like I could see making a video game level and having it show up on a table so I can look around it while I'm changing things in it. And I can think of things that I want to do with VR, but I have to think about it. They don't just sort of automatically come to mind.
Now, there's a disparity between HoloLens and Magic Leap in terms of what we know about each of these platforms. On the one hand, lots and lots of people have seen the demos of HoloLens in the Microsoft announcements. And the demos are really impressive, but they don't actually show exactly what you see when you're experiencing it. They're kind of half smoke and mirrors, half actual demo. And then there's Magic Leap, which very few people have seen a real demo of, but which I believe, unlike HoloLens, we have an actual video that was shot through the Magic Leap hardware, so we actually see what people are seeing. And in that demo, which I think came out a couple of weeks ago, last week, a couple of weeks ago, something like that, it was incredibly impressive because they had these virtual objects floating in space and able to hide behind a desk and cast reflections and shadows on objects in a very natural, intuitive way. So as somebody who's tried HoloLens and presumably seen the Magic Leap video, are they more or less identical in experience? Are they different? How do they differ? I mean, how would you sort of at this time rank what you know about HoloLens and Magic Leap?
So I haven't tried Magic Leap, but HoloLens can definitely map space. There's a little origami ball simulator where the ball can roll around a table or roll off it, and you can see what's going on. Magic Leap, it's very hard to say whether the field of view is actually better because cameras, you can see through the lens and it's great, but cameras don't have peripheral vision. So I feel like it's difficult to make a comparison without trying something firsthand. And unfortunately, while I may think that Magic Leap exists, I have yet to see any compelling evidence that it does.
So that's what we were talking about before. That I mean, I'm like, is it for real? Like, no one's really seen it. I know the CEO is a little bit wacky. Like, he came out and said like 6 months ago that that HoloLens causes neural damage or something like that. I don't know. And it was like a Reddit AMA that he said this. He had really no proof. Talk a little bit about what you think the future of Magic Leap is, just from what you've heard. Do you think it's hype or for real?
I mean, I'm careful about saying anything because who knows, in like a week, Magic Leap could suddenly unveil all the things they've been promising and I'll look like an idiot. But based on what we know, very few people have seen it. It's not clear whether they have something portable. They've made repeated promises that seem very hard to deliver on and keep getting pushed back, like that they would release an SDK, a software development kit this year, that they're making millions of things, which they haven't actually talked about what those are. It's totally possible that they have something. They just are not tipping their hand at all, and they are making some fairly impressive claims.
I think that, to me, at this point, looking ahead, I think it's clear that 2016 is going to be the year that virtual reality really becomes available, where people have a few choices about it. There'll be more content for the first time. I don't think it'll go mainstream this coming year, but I think virtual reality and augmented reality and mixed reality will go mainstream in 3, 4, 5 years maybe, and become a real culture-shifting force. But again, next year is going to be an exciting year for early adopters. But I think the $64,000 question is what ultimately virtual reality will do to society. I assume you read the book Ready Player One?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So in Ready Player One, I'm not going to spoil the actual plot points, but it depicts a dystopian future where virtual reality essentially has a major role in ruining human society, because essentially what happens is people are so enamored with and sucked into the world of virtual reality, a single platform called Oasis, where people actually go to school inside virtual reality. They go to work in virtual reality. They do almost everything in virtual reality. So in actual reality, everything goes to hell because nobody's really doing anything. And so people live in these dilapidated, stacked trailers and so on. That makes a very strong point, and it is a potentially frightening point. I mean, there's some people, I mean, the horrible reality of the human condition is that some people are lucky enough to live with happiness and safety and security and enough wealth and in beautiful place, and lots of people live in a horrible place with an ugly reality with all kinds of problems all around them. And I guess people in both places may be tempted to escape into virtual reality where everything is beautiful, everything is awesome. You can represent yourself as this incredible person. And we already see this to a certain extent with a lot of, some gamers, for example, die at their gaming consoles because they just never stop playing. They don't eat and stuff like that. I can see virtual reality being so compelling and addictive that people will essentially banned in the real world, and we could have a massive social problem. Do you think that is a possibility?
The two really big things here are that, first of all, any technology does that. People escape into books all the time. Anything that could present a fictionalized world, people seem to be extremely capable of escaping into, no matter how low bandwidth it is. The other big thing is that we have to figure out what we think virtual reality is going to be technically, because right now everything we have almost is visual and audio. In Ready Player One, you literally feel like you are in a place. Like, it's basically the Matrix from what I remember. And obviously, if you have a perfect simulation of real life, then I think people might totally choose to live in that. But if what you have is sort of more visual World of Warcraft, then a certain number of people definitely will, maybe a larger number of people. But it still seems like it hasn't reached a point where it can deliver things that reality can deliver, even on a basic level, like touch.
Well, does it seem like reality is delivering less and less? I mean, if you think about it in a dystopian, imagine a dystopian future where, we haven't taken care of our environment. Like we do live in these screens. I mean, do you imagine that it is, do you see it going in that direction, that reality is becoming less interesting, less compelling to us, and virtual reality is becoming more compelling?
It's hard to say because I can't speak to any of the people who are really affected by the worst things that are happening in the world, like environmental droughts or floods, or people who work in sweatshops. And I feel like I have no way of predicting what the lives of people who are not rich Americans will be like. For people like me, it really doesn't feel like the world is going to become a dystopia. It feels like I would rather escape from the past far more than the present or the future. I mean, the past was awful. And things have gotten better along so many axes that it's hard for me to imagine that the future is going to be that much worse.
As a history freak, I am looking forward to escaping to the past, where you can cherry pick attributes of the past. You can go to ancient times without having to deal with ancient dentistry, for example. So that'll be nice. Addie Robertson, I want to thank you so much for joining us today for this special episode of Tech News Today. Addie Robertson is at theverge.com and on Twitter at thedextriarchy. Addie, thank you again for joining us on Tech News Today.
Thank you.
You can subscribe to Tech News Today at twit.tv/TNT. You can also watch us live every weekday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1700 UTC. That's at twit.tv/live. And if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, you can come in and be part of our studio audience. To do that, just send email to tickets@twit.tv. Also follow us on Twitter. We're Tech News Today TV.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Tech News Today. The show is produced by Jason Cleanthus. We're Mike Elgan and Megan Morrone. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.